It's time to join Montana's very own and your voice for agriculture, Talkin' Ag Lane Nordland, for today's Lanecast.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Agriculture Conversation on the Lanecast Ag Podcast with the Western Ag Network. And I tell you what, folks, spring 2024, well, it's rolling by, and we had quite the weather here this past week, hit much of the state of Montana. But that hasn't slowed down the Montana Stock Growers Association, who has been out on the road all winter and spring, hosting producer profitability listening sessions, rancher-started, rancher-led initiatives to really hear what the thoughts are from producers out in the countryside and working to help address those challenges and keep people in business here in the Big Sky State and across the nation as well. And we're going to be joined today by Rayleigh Honeycutt with the Montana Stock Growers Association, their Executive Vice President, and their Second Vice President, Mr. Turk Stovall. But before we get to our guests, we just want to give a big shout out to our friends at HerdWatch Cattle Management Software. You can download their app today to increase productivity and maximize profitability. Visit herdwatch.com for, get this, a special offer on your first 6 months. Go check that out. Again, herdwatch.com. HerdWatch, simplifying livestock. Well, again, as I mentioned, friends, we're here. I guess I didn't say where we are. We are in Great Falls, Montana, Western Livestock Auction. And is this your 9th or 10th listening session that you've had here so far this year, Rayleigh?
This will be our 12th.
What has that been like, just being out and about across the Big Sky State?
You know, it's been great. Like, it's something that we have talked about as a leadership team for a while, how we really needed to get out on the road, and talking about producer profitability really gave us the opportunity to go to local sale barns and really engage in a conversation that our organization hasn't had in many years.
And Turk, for yourself, from the volunteer leader position, what's it been like just seeing producers from all different organizations and different size operations just out and about here over the last few weeks?
Well, you know, when you travel the state lane, sometimes you forget of how diverse our state really is. And so issues that are really important to producers on the eastern side of the state, looks a little bit different if you're on the western side of the state. And really, it just shows how important us as an organization needs to get out and really listen firsthand from, real Montana farmers and ranchers and be able to address those concerns. And that's our objective, is we want to know what do we need to do to help keep our producers profitable. And the one overlying topic is what do we need to do to get this next generation engaged, and how do we incentivize them to get into production and take over these legacy ranches to really even keep Montana?
Yeah, so how did the conversation come up, or the idea of traveling out? And Stock Growers does a good job traveling out, meeting with producers, attending the regional stock grower and cattleman meetings, and helping create that policy for the future of the organization. But how did the concept of the producer profitability initiative really get ignited, Turk?
Sure. About 2 or 3 years ago, there was many Montana Stock Growers members got asked to be involved in a working group that was led by Joe Goggins and the LMA group. And we came together, we met there in Billings to talk about issues that really were important to move this industry forward, as well as to move Montana forward, and how are we going to address that. And by and large, we all come up with similar topics to talk about. But the one thing that we always talked about is, we need to start working together as an industry, and we need to see where we can put down differences and then see where we can create some wins, because we need to actually create a better environment for us to be able to continue to operate, as well as to get the next generation involved. But a lot of things that came up is, what does the agriculture look like in the next 20 years? And what are we going to do about it? And how, as an industry, we better wake up and really get some major topics addressed and work together as an industry, because it's important for us to quit, arguing amongst ourselves and working together to get some things across the finish line for our producers.
Well, Turk, I think that's a great setup for our conversation, just to see how these sessions are going, what some of that feedback is. But before we really get into the meat and potatoes of it, we are going to take a quick break and hear from our friends at HerdWatch. We'll be back with the Montana Stock Growers Association from Western Livestock here in Great Falls, Montana, right after this.
Less time on paperwork and more time on the things that truly drive your operation. HerdWatch allows large and small cattle producers to easily direct day-to-day management from the palm of their hand. HerdWatch simplifies record keeping and allows you to make better decisions on your ranch. Easily track calving, weaning, animal health, and access that information anytime, anywhere. Join over 21,000 producers. Visit herdwatch.com for a special offer on your first 6 months. HerdWatch, 10 years of simplifying livestock.
Well, again, a big thank you to our friends at HerdWatch. Check them out. And again, that 6-month offer there at herdwatch.com. Well, we are joined today by Rayleigh Honeycutt and Mr. Turk Stovall with the Montana Stock Growers Association. And when we've sat down for this conversation, this is the second to last producer profitability listening session here in Great Falls. The final one will be next week in Ronan. Obviously, this conversation coming out after the completion of the series. But really trying to keep producers in business, trying to get that next generation involved. And again, you have to be sustainable profitability-wise, environmental-wise in today's world. But Turk, as you've been out on the road, I guess what is the main thing that you are seeing or hearing from producers? I know there's probably different issues depending on what part of the state you're in, but what has that truly been like, face to face with these producers that you've probably never met before, or maybe you've heard of, or you've been lifelong friends with, and they've been bringing up issues that really challenge their family operations?
Well, you're hearing all sorts of different topics for us to talk about. Now, we have boiled those down that really go back to our resolutions that were passed last December at the annual convention. And those resolutions actually were brought forward from the members that were part of these working groups. And those resolutions really focused on multi-generational ranching, sustainable ranching, and also for us to try to work together more as an industry. And so as we have brought that resolutions forward across the state, that really started from the grassroots of ideas that came through the policy governance of the association, it has been overwhelming of the feedback to where we have gotten, hey, thanks for addressing these issues. And that's where we really boiled it down to 5 different points to virtually get the conversation started. And that would be the tax policy. That would be, where do government programs fit into this discussion? Labor, we talk about labor all the time, and what are we going to do to try to address that to make it better for us to be able to produce in the future? The other is when we really look at this next generation, if you didn't have an operation to be able to help you get going, is it even possible for you to wake up one day and say, I want to be a rancher?
I don't think it is, personally.
It's pretty tough. And so
I hope I'm proven wrong there, Turk.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely wanting to have that discussion. And so we talk about the barriers to entry, for new producers. And what is a new producer? Is that a young producer, or is that just someone who hasn't been a producer before? And the other topic that I would almost have to say has been a surprise to us all is we've been talking about mentorship. And we've really been talking about how do we take care of our own to be able to, lend a hand up or to help them at least get started. If that's from a favorable loan, or if that's, I'm not really going out to try to lease my grass to the highest bidder out there, but I want to help this young couple get going. And that has created some of the most productive discussions I think I've ever been involved with. And it's addicting. As we have shared this story, it has really spread like wildfire, not only across our state, but there's been other states watching what's going on here too and saying, wow, you know what, maybe we should do that in our state too. And that's been really rewarding, and we're sure fortunate to be able to do this.
Really, from your perspective there at the home office, going out, talking, and working with the officer team, I mean, when we look at this, how complex is this as we go out, have these listening sessions and truly talk about some tough issues that can get emotional, because this is people's livelihoods, multi-generational, maybe they're first generational. What has that been like from your perspective as the executive overseeing this opportunity to reach out to Montana producers?
We've had phenomenal response. So while Montana Stock Growers is kind of the people behind the curtain putting together the logistics, we really have had an open door policy, to dovetail to what Turk says. Like, we really want to work to unite the industry. And so from my standpoint, having other organizations, leadership, RCAF, U.S. Cattlemen's, Montana Cattlemen's, Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, members from all of their organizations coming in and being excited to have and be part of the conversation really, shows that we are resonating with a large audience across the state of Montana. And it's really exciting to see and hear the feedback and personal stories and testimonies.
So you could almost say a little bit of a breaking down some barriers that have been put up over the years, even though we have so much in common. Sometimes just having an open conversation does a lot of good, you would say, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, our meetings are pretty simple. It's a introduction. We do some, interactive surveying, and really then it's open mic and people can talk about whatever they want. We do lay some ground rules, as Turk mentioned. We're not going to talk about the things that we can't agree upon, because I think we all know there are things that we're not going to agree upon. So let's not waste our energy, and really let's focus on where we can make change and bring together some solutions and move the industry forward.
So what have been some of the most similar issues? Obviously, I know you mentioned focusing on that next generation coming in, having the tools available, but what are some of those other areas that you're hearing at all the local livestock markets that you've been to, or operations that have hosted you? What are some of the similar things you're hearing? And then we'll dive into maybe some of the ones that are popping up that are more regional issues.
To me, labor's been probably the universal theme. I think it's nothing that we didn't know, but everyone is struggling with labor and how to keep their business in operation and sustainable. And so we talk a lot about the H-2A program, but we also talk about how we can bring in people that didn't grow up in the industry and need those technical skills, maybe haven't worked around livestock, and what our industry can do either through agriculture education or tech schools or hands-on internship opportunities to really build that workforce that we need moving forward.
Lane, obviously, clearly the elephant in the room is the estate tax. And as we bring that topic up to discuss, I mean, that is for sure a topic that is already a worry and a concern of every producer that has come to these listening sessions, regardless of which organization they're with or their size or whatever, their business model is. We are for sure letting everybody understand that this is probably one of the most important topics we have to come together as an industry, because that is set to expire, and it will be devastating to the ranching community.
I find it so interesting because when we really started discussing producer profitability, Western Ag Network helped kick that off. Russell Nimitz emceed that session there at Stock Growers Convention in December 2023, and the tax expert with Pinion came and spoke at the breakfast, and I found that so enlightening, because I think so much of the time we get pinned into the political conversation surrounding this, and obviously I was a young guy when all the movement really was taking place, when the Republicans had the opportunity to totally do away with the death tax, and then Hurricane Katrina hit, and then the vote was never brought up because they're like, we have to pay for all this damage somehow. I found that very interesting. But at the end of the day, it's going to take both political parties to push that through. How vital is that when you've been having these discussions, so that folks are having those conversations, whether it's in Montana or Wyoming or Idaho or these other states you've been talking about? How do we truly try to make some significant changes or do away with the death tax permanently? Because it's been up to the administrations to do what they want to do with it. It's a big struggle, but it has to start somewhere.
Well, I think we have to continue to tell our story. I also think that we need to do a better job as an industry to remind America what it was like when they didn't see food on the shelves. And it was when we were going through COVID, American agriculture still showed up to feed their cattle. And we learned that we were essential. And we learned that it didn't matter what was going on in the world. We still had to feed our animals, and we still had to produce to feed ourselves, our families, our neighbors, and our country. And I actually believe sometimes even across our country, people have forgotten what the American farmer and rancher really do for us, not only the nourishment of our daily lives, but really it's a national security issue. And it's one of our strong points as a country that we have the American farmer and rancher making sure that we are fed and that we can take care of ourselves. And we just got to make sure policies don't violate that.
This is also an opportunity for coalition building, right? Like, while the estate tax levels are fairly high right now, if it does go down, this becomes a Main Street issue. This is not just an agricultural issue. This is a every small business on Main Street issue. And so we can find a lot of allies on both sides of the aisle when we start talking about how you keep your business into the future.
Well, and when we look at that, obviously that transition to the next generation is so important. And keeping, as quoting Joe Goggins, you got to keep generational operations generational. Obviously, the estate tax is a part of that too. But when we're looking at passing that operation down to the next generation, or selling that multi-generational operation to another young couple that wants to make a go of it, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. I think liquidity is a big aspect of that. I think 10% interest rates currently are a big inhibitor to that growth too for so many young people. So I guess what are some of the conversations on how expanding on that mentorship opportunity, or trying to pair up some young producers to, maybe be able to come in and lease to buy an operation, or work with the kids that are now 65 years old and the parents are just deciding what they may want to do with it, and making sure that those kids don't sell to American Prairie. I guess, what have those conversations been like amongst the attendees, but also as we look at trying to really create an initiative behind this and helping those young people?
We've had examples where there's been couples that, maybe didn't have any children, but they're really wanting, it's a legacy, multi-generational ranch, and they'd like to see that continue to ranch. And they have, teamed up with maybe another couple and went into a buy-sell that, those land values at least had a chance to be paid with production agriculture. We've heard of stories where, making a favorable lease options for younger producers. Just even in recent time, we've through this process, we've heard from producers saying, "Hey, I want to help get a young producer involved, and these are some assets I would like to lease to them and help them out." We've heard where there's been some financing options, and it is humbling, Lane, of the generosity of our industry that are willing to really help this next generation. And the one thing that we talked about is how can we be better as an industry organization to get a family that wants to help, as well as a new generation connected.
And I think those families are out there, but sometimes it's tough, though, but when you say this is a multi-family generation operation. But, when the kids haven't been a part of the operation except for Christmas and Easter or once a year when they come out, and again, they could have grandkids at this point, too. What are some of the resources or maybe tax incentives? I think we look at that too. What are the conversations about maybe creating policy to help create maybe some tax breaks for some of those purchases on the state or federal level? I know the federal level is tough, but talking about that maybe on the state level, has that been brought up?
Yeah, so obviously from a state level, there's a lot of conversations in the interim between legislative sessions discussing property taxes. We've heard some great ideas. We've heard things about, almost getting what I would call like a tax abatement, that if you're going to keep the land in production agriculture for 10 years, you don't pay taxes on it, or ways to get some type of capital gains incentive from a state perspective. So I think there's a lot of ideas. Our next step is really bringing in those technical experts to really get into the nitty-gritty of those things. But I wanted to go back to what you had asked a little earlier about regional differences.
Oh,
and
yeah, I asked that and I forgot about it, didn't I?
Yeah, Turk talks too long. No, one of the things that I would say has been the most interesting is we were in Stevensville last week, I guess, and then you compare it to Eastern Montana, and it's a completely different conversation. Like, those producers in the Bitterroot Valley they're pretty much access to land is very finite. And so how do we create, unique opportunities and situations for, current landowners to transition to new or beginning producers? That meeting was also great because we had the Forest Service in the room, and a young producer brought up Forest Service leases and how we can be more innovative or responsive to producer needs. And the Forest Service was like, we want to have a meeting and a conversation with you. So not only is it just listening to the producers, but we've been really strategic and tried to bring in the industry and partners that we interface with as well, because they need to hear this story as well, so that when they're making decisions in a boardroom or in policy meetings, they hear firsthand what people are needing.
That's really interesting. You brought up the public land aspect of it too, and that the Forest Service was almost a little bit excited about it, because I actually wrote that down too. I mean, I think if there's young producers out there, if they had the ability to have a federal or state permit to graze for that short period of time each year, where they could maybe increase their herd by 50 or 150 head if they're a smaller operator, that could make such a huge difference. But it seems sometimes the folks that, they hold on to those permits, and it's tough to find new ones. I don't think in this administration we're going to see any creation, maybe, of new permits. Sorry, but that's just my personal opinion on that. But that could make a huge difference too. And
in the short conversation that we did have, it was thinking outside the box from that, right? I think the traditional base acre permits are going to still exist. But how can somebody, buy some yearlings and use a fire mitigation type of concept to get on the forest where the forest needs some forest management and get off, and not necessarily have to have that long-term lease? So I think they're open to some creative ideas, and I think we have some producers with some really creative ideas. Lots of windshield time happens, so there's lots of ideas and lots of concepts.
The overriding concept is we really need to keep the land in production. Mm-hmm. And how do we incentivize that? If that's federal lands, public lands, private lands, and that is that's getting to be a concern even from a Montana standpoint, where these ranches have been purchased, and they're not turning cows out anymore. Maybe they're managing wildlife, or there's just a different business plan there. And it just puts even more strain to, Rayleigh's point there in the Stevensville. There, just these young producers, as well as even current producers, need access to land.
Well, and there's so much talk, though, especially on the consumer end, about sustainability, and everybody has a different definition for sustainability. And I know regenerative is now one of the hot key topics, but. And I know in our business we think of being sustainable with our land, sustainable with our cattle, but also sustainable with our finances. But a part of that conversation is also the sustainability of our rural communities, because we're seeing rural communities, some are flourishing. When you have people I think Winifred, for example, they had a benefactor, obviously, that's come in, that's really put a lot of infrastructure, a lot of young families moving back. But, you look just the situation of just being able to go to the doctor or being able to go buy groceries. That's tough for young people, too, that have come accustomed. I know that everyone says that millennial generation, well, the millennials, we're getting gray hair, we're getting old, and my knees hurt. It's that next generation that's kind of, they're the ones coming up now, too. I think the millennials, we get too big of a bad rap on that. But when we look at that, we become accustomed to certain things when we go to college and look at that just to make life a little easier. And a lot of people might say, well, you're just too spoilers. But it is nice to have a gym to go work out. And that comes into your sustainability, your mental health. I guess, what are some of the conversations about that? How it's not just the farmers and ranchers that are a part of our rural communities. It's also those stakeholders in town, the tire shop, the, cafe, implement, whatever that might be. What has that been? Maybe some comments that folks come and attend these that are from not in the production side, but they're a key stakeholder in our businesses.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. People want rural Montana and rural America to be revitalized or, have sustainability moving into the future. And I think there are many different stakeholders or cooperators that we interface with that want to see the same thing. And so we talk about the story of sustainability and best practices and management practices, but really it does come down to educating the lawmakers, because at the end of the day, there's not very many people making decisions that have huge impacts on our rural communities, where money goes, policies that affect those communities.
Just to add to that, I think that's another of our goals, is to help create at least awareness of more tools that are available to producers, because the bottom line for these rural communities, they need producers to be profitable, so they stay there and they have a reason to want to go into that business and and grow and bring in employees or help other families come into the community. And that's been a really big topic, and that's where we even talked about what is the role of government. Where does government play into this as far as useful tools to be able to if that's keeping a current operation going, or if that's helping someone completely new get in the business. And we've taken a deep dive into the FSA programs. We've taken a deep dive into some of the other beginning farmer and rancher programs. And we've also took a really strong look at the LRP. And the LRP is a tool that has grown over the years here, and that's the livestock risk protection, that we think could be some pretty big tweaks to that could really be beneficial to a younger producer, going out and getting that loan and being able to grow their operation. Because we do talk about this equity between the livestock sector and the farming sector of we measure the dollars available to the farming sector in the billions. And then we look at the dollars that go into the livestock sector in the hundreds of millions. Now, do they need to be equal? We're not suggesting that, but we definitely think maybe as a livestock industry, we need to maybe do a better job of seeing how can we better create some more tools for these livestock producers.
And I know you probably get criticism from some of your attendees when that's brought up too. I heard an interesting take on it recently. The regional winners from Florida for the Environmental Stewardship Award program, they're surrounded by a national wildlife refuge, by one of the fastest growing communities in the nation there in the state of Florida. And if they didn't utilize NRCS programs just to help rangeland improvement, equip, whatever that might be, and the gal, fourth generation, that she's carrying on their family legacy down there, she goes, I've paid my taxes on this. And we're utilizing this to keep our communities vibrant. And I think I've heard that before, but she was so eloquent in how she said that, because she goes, our neighbors have criticized us too, but our neighbors aren't here anymore now. And I'm not advocating for or against on that, but I think that was a different perspective on that. But do you believe that there are some barriers, though, just in being able to go into those FSA or NRCS offices? I know some producers just are uncomfortable going in there. As a young producer, I don't feel that I have enough knowledge. I'm always asking. I'm asking Administrator Ducheneau. I've asked him questions directly on Farm Service Agency stuff, and I know that USDA is trying to make it easier and streamline, but sometimes there's a lot of hoops to jump through when it sometimes is easier to go to the bank and maybe pay a higher interest rate, and that defeats the purpose when you can get that lower interest rate at FSA. What is that? What's the feedback been from other producers?
We've definitely heard all sides of the story, right? We have those that don't want government programs and those that want government programs. I think our key takeaway is we need to have the tools, and you can decide what's best for your operation on what tools you want to implement. But to follow up on what you just said, absolutely, Lane. Young Beginning Farmer and Rancher program, We hear about how kind of cumbersome the paperwork is, how maybe the limits aren't working. It gives you just enough money to kind of hang yourself and not really be able to kind of get your operation up and running. We heard a really great story from a young producer about how he was able to, he got an opportunity to either farm or get cows or buy land, but he couldn't get enough money to buy cows and land. And so really he opted to go the farming route because it was just a lot easier. So I think there's a lot of improvements we can do in relationship to barriers to entry for producers. We're not suggesting that accountability is not there, but I also think there's a lot of things related to like timing of payments and how things are done that really could be streamlined in a lot of different federal agencies and their programs to help producers kind of be more able to react in real time instead of kind of this lag over and over and over again, and you always feel like you're catching up.
Turk, when you did the panel there at convention, you just talked about, how fast life goes and how things can change so fast, and how it's important that we need to make this producer initiative and get these solutions. And I think we should point out, you're not selling people's calves. You're not the one making the decisions on the calves. I always get really upset when people complain about the price they receive for their calves, and I say, well, have you made any improvements to your herd? Have you added value on there? I'm on a soapbox right now. This is not tied into the stock growers conversation, but I'm doing a Gary Brester moment in an econ class and throwing my soapbox down. But when we're looking at those opportunities, how fast life goes, there's so many producers out there that are 60 to 70 years old and they maybe just took over the operation 5-10 years before, or maybe they got it younger, whatever it may be. How important is it, though, that we start having the conversations about passing on the operation, a succession plan? What are some tools that could be in place to work with some of our partners out there to maybe put succession planning, not just a keynote speaker at a meeting, but really trying to help producers push through those succession plans?
Well, it's, I'd have to say, as us as an association have tried to share as much as possible with succession planning for a long time. But, obviously each individual ranch and family is their own decision maker, and when they have that comfort level, and it almost seems like it almost takes a scare or I might realize that I'm not going to be here forever to start having that discussion. And it is such a personal decision. And that's why it's a tough one.
I call it the most awkward conversation you'll ever have.
Yep.
But you're absolutely right, because 1/3 of farmers and ranchers in our country are over 65. Like, there is a bit of urgency that comes with this conversation.
Well, I know we got folks coming up for the session. They're probably going to start coming into the ring here. But from your perspective, what are some of the key things that we can do a glimpse maybe about what are the next steps? I know we'll have a full unveiling. You'll go through the points, kind of compile all that. You'll release that at the mid-year meeting coming up at the end of this month there in Miles City. But what are the next steps after this? Obviously, I know you're all very proactive. You want to take this information and go. But what truly are the next steps for us to take these and help producers be profitable?
Yeah, so we will be kind of giving a recap of the roadshow at our mid-year meeting, which is May 28th through the 30th. We would invite anyone who's interested in hearing more to join us in Miles City. We'll be celebrating our 140th anniversary there. So, great to always go back to Miles City and celebrate those anniversary years. For us, from there, that's where the tactics are going to come into play, right? We know there is a hard deadline in 2025 regarding the estate tax. So, rubber meets the road. We're going to be working on that immediately, or we are working on that. I think the other thing that we've heard is a lot about labor and a lot about mentorship and barriers to entry. So we'll be coming up with potential programs, looking for partners. We've had a lot of people reach out to us and say, hey, we want to be part of the solution, let us build. So we'll be building out some of those programs and really just I think the important part is, while this roadshow's kind of been across this 24th spring, it's just the beginning. Like, we have so much to do. We have great leadership. John Grandy's our president. He's committed to this. We have Leslie Robinson and Turk lined up as our succession of leadership. They've committed to this. So this is something that Montana stock growers will be focusing on at least for 4, if not longer. And so there's a lot of things that we'll be rolling out in the future.
Obviously, this came from the grassroots policy, came through resolutions. This wasn't just Rayleigh's idea sitting back and this is what we're going to do. This came from the membership. And I think that's important to bring up here because we've been talking about being active, hearing from producers. What's your message to those folks that have showed up? Maybe they're not members of stock growers. Maybe they're not members of Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, or these other groups, but it's been wide open to all producers of all affiliations. But how important is it to be engaged? Maybe they can't make the annual meeting, but gosh darn, make it to the annual stock grower cattlemen's meetings right down the road and share your frustrations there too and help create policy. Because again, I bring that up. This came up through the policy making session with stock growers.
Well, I don't know if I can emphasize enough. I mean, just how this how it was created and how it went through the governance process of Montana stock growers through the convention. It was debated and discussed, and the resolutions were edited and then fully passed. And then we moved forward with exactly what the resolutions and the directive said. And what I always also just remind everybody, the reason we are moving forward with this directive across the state is because our membership voted on it. And so I can't just emphasize enough, if you're being involved in a membership organization, you can make change. And if you can't be there, tell somebody. And the one thing that I just want to compliment the Montana Stock Growers staff is they have created all channels to be able to communicate. And so, just as Rayleigh said, this is really the beginning. We have heard from, it's going to be nearly almost 1,000 people that have come to these events that we've put together and listening sessions. And so we are compiling real Montana farmers and ranchers' ideas, and we are going to continue to fight for that. And so we always end, and you'll hear it tonight, we always end the session with, well, now what? Well, we are already doing now what? We have already talked about this in Washington, D.C. 3 weeks ago. We've already talked to our senators. We've talked to our U.S. congressmen. We've talked to other leaders. We've been in front of the senatorial committee, in front of their senior staff, to share this story, to try and say, you know what, we want to make sure that our industry in Montana as well as the United States continues far into the future because of what's very important. And we're really carrying the ideas and the voices of real Montana farmers and ranchers. And one thing I'll tell you, Lane, when we have shared this story, people are listening. They're not only listening in Washington, D.C., they're listening across our country and across our state, and we are very focused and committed to making a difference.
And I would also add, find an organization. It doesn't have to be Montana Stock Growers, but find something that fits you and engage, because these are organizations, whether it's, Montana Stock Growers or others, we need members, and we need members' stories and their, testimonies. And so whatever's easy for you, if it's reading a newsletter, if it's listening to a podcast, if it's, listening to your local news, be educated and engage in those organizations, because membership is so important for the future and longevity of these organizations.
Very well said. And, speaking of the mid-year meeting, I heard that Turk Stovall and the Run'em Boys is going to be playing music. Is that what I heard? Oh, Kyle Shob and the Wacom Boys.
Yes.
They're going to be playing some music there at the Sunset Banquet. So
absolutely. We have a great lineup. Our foundation puts on the Sunset Banquet, and they have a great lineup with some. We'll have an online auction this year, which will be a little different. So if you're not able to attend, you can still bid on some of the great items. And then, like you said, Kyle Shob and the Wacom Boys, they'll be putting on a great night.
Well, I look forward to seeing everybody out there in Miles City, and again, a lot of information to digest and put together, and so we're really looking forward to the results of that and seeing what the initiative and the progress forward will be. And again, this little glimpse of you got two more left. You got to get through tonight's session too, and then of course the one in Ronan. But again, a lot of work and but a lot of priorities set forward by producers across the state. So thanks for joining us here today.
No, thank you, Lane.
Well, friends, again, thanks for joining us here today as we sat down with some of the leaders of the Montana Stock Growers Association as they're close to wrapping up their producer profitability initiative. Hey, check out more about the initiative itself. You can actually watch the sessions that have taken place by visiting mtbeef.org. And hey, if you have not registered yet, go check out the mtbeef.org and register for the mid-year meeting there, and you can see Turk Stovall and the Running Boys. Kyle Schob and the Wacom Boys coming up there. You got to give auctioneers a little grief sometimes. You do.
And Turk might sing by the end of the night. You never know.
You and I could. Yeah, I'll bring my guitar too. Yeah.
Might not be the first time.
Well, friends, thanks for joining us here today, and a big thank you to our friends at Herd Watch for helping you bring this Lanecast Ag podcast. It's named after me, and I can't say it, but bringing you this Lanecast Ag podcast here today. Thanks for joining us. Catch you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lanecast with Talkin' Ag, Lane Nordlund. For more on Lane, check out his Facebook page, Lane Nordlund Ag Broadcaster, and NordlandCommunications.com.